Well, welcome. We're thrilled to have everybody. Today, we're doing a special talk with Zach Seward, Loreben Tuquero, and Eric Wishart, the promise and perils of AI in election coverage. I'm Dr. Dan Axelrod. I'm a professor at St. Thomas University, and I'm also a member of SPJ's Media Ethics Committee, along with Eric. And we're excited to have a lively discussion that Eric will moderate. Eric is the new author of a University of Chicago book on journalism ethics. Journalism Ethics 21 Essentials from Wars to Artificial Intelligence. I'll be putting a link for where you can learn more about that book toward the end of the chat. He teaches at Hong Kong University, and he is also AFP's former editor-in-chief and their current ombudsman. Loreben is a staff writer for PolitiFact, which is the gold standard of fact checking here in the US, part of Pointer, and she covers generative artificial intelligence and the spread of misinformation. And Zach is the New York Times, can we still say newish, director of AI initiatives. He's the founder of Quartz, which has a great rep, and he's held all kinds of roles in tech and journalism, and is a former reporter and editor for the Wall Street Journal. So we're going to save questions for the end of the talk. You can feel free to use the Q&A feature here at the bottom. I will pop back in toward the end and start fielding everyone's questions. And Eric, I'll let you take it away.
Thanks very much, Dan, for the introduction. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining. And I think the whole disinformation question surrounding the use of AI is quite front and foremost in people's minds. But I thought we might start the discussion, Zach, with you to maybe take some of the more positive aspects of AI to get us started. So it's a great tool as well, right?
Sometimes.
Yeah, sounds like you've got a great job. Can you please explain to us what your job on AI? First of all, what does your job at the Times involve?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you for having me. And to answer Dan's question, it's definitely still a new job. I just started at the very end of 2024. So I'm less than a year in, and it's already changed like 3 or 4 times, given the speed at which AI is changing. But it's a newsroom role. And since being hired, I've created a small team, 4 other folks, 2 engineers, a designer, an editor, and myself. And we're focused on prototyping uses of AI that might benefit our colleagues in the Times newsroom and or our readers. So it's like reporting tools, helping investigations, powering investigations with AI, production assistance, sort of behind the scenes, where can AI help in our process, and then reader experiences, what sorts of ways of consuming the Times. For instance, today you can now get almost every article read to you by an automated voice. That's AI, but what other experiences might we be able to put in front of readers? That's the charge, and we're hard at work experimenting on all of the above.
And what AI tools are you using at the Times, and what's the general idea? Is it try out tools and see how it works, or are there particular ground rules? What's the situation?
Definitely particular ground rules. I mean, we spend a lot of time just listening, because the particular risk of a team like ours, the AI team, is seeing every problem as something to be solved by AI, which is absolutely not the case. Most of the things we discover is there are better or different solutions. If we're looking for real problems in the newsroom, things that are just too hard to do, especially the stuff that gets us really passionate, and I'm sure we'll talk about the context of election coverage, or just types of reporting that simply could not be done without the assistance of machine learning because of the volume of data involved, for instance. And looking for specific challenges like that to help aid on individual investigations, and then sort of trying to lift up and build tools that might help more reporters do the same thing on an ongoing basis.
I mean, I saw a recent talk of yours. You said generative AI can make sense out of chaos. Okay. So, I mean, throwing that one back to you, how can journalists apply that to the coverage of this election, which is becoming an election like no other? Well, going into the more practical side, and let's also bear in mind that not that many people work for a big newsroom like the Times. So what tools do you see journalists being able to use it specifically in the election coverage?
Yeah, it's a good question. One of the most important findings so far in our work, I think, is that the most powerful use of generative AI is not to generate anything new tech. Obviously, I think that almost the entire discourse around tools like ChatGPT has been precisely that the fact that it can spit out a 5-page or 10-page or 20-page essay of just like that for you. But one, at the times we just have no interest in drafting articles that way or writing with AI. But also, before you even get to generating any new text, there just are a lot of challenges in a newsroom, and I'll focus on election-related challenges that can benefit from the same technology. So basically, it's anything where there's just way too much data for individuals to go through, and maybe it's also in fairly messy shape. It's not it's not ready to just dump into an Excel spreadsheet and start analyzing. When you think about the U.S. elections, there's a lot of examples of that kind of data. I mean, the voter rolls, campaign finance information is notoriously different. It does come in decently structured format, but it's whatever the donor wrote in the field for their job or employer, and a generative AI tool that's capable of understanding semantically what does that text say could help clean up a data set like that and allow you to do analysis that just wouldn't otherwise be possible. Another thought is right now all news organizations are engaged in a vetting process, investigating the pasts of all of the candidates, especially ones who sort of emerged all of a sudden onto the scene, whether J.D. Vance or Kamala Harris, and especially with someone like Vance, who's relatively unvetted, a millennial like me who's spent their entire life on the internet, and also happens to have spent like a decade talking to right-wing podcasts online. There's just a voluminous amount of information, or just stuff you said on the internet that is actually so large that it would be impossible to just sit and listen to it all. That's a pretty good use case for AI as well, sort of combing through the pasts of candidates in a way that it's not possible to do that kind of thing with a traditional control F. Let me just find a keyword that I'm looking for sort of tactics.
And to get a bit more into the weeds, how would you actually do that? I mean, what tools would you use, and how would you get the information? How would you scrape the internet, or how would you do it?
Yeah, well, so I'm speaking, hypothetically about any of those projects here. You need an LLM, a large language model, sometimes
Right.
now referred to as a foundational model, at it to do most of that work. We're at a point now where the major foundational models are all very tight at the top of the rankings for LLMs, where maybe it depends. They have slight differences depending on the use case, but honestly, I'm not here to recommend a particular one. I think any of the major ones would be fine to use. I think you for the kinds of projects I'm talking about, what you need is that, and this we find is kind of the magic combination: AI, large language model, engineering, one or more engineers who can, because none of this stuff works sort of quite right out of the box, and expertise. And I'm borrowing this model from a friend, Noah Breyers, who says, AI and code on its own is like a traditional software. But adding in expertise, in this case, a federal elections expert, the reporter in your newsroom who's covered campaign finance for decades, is sort of the key missing ingredient, because what a lot of these tools can do really well is translate like the process that you might go through as a reporter into a more programmatic approach, sometimes literally by just explaining to the LLM in words how you would go about, say, examining a filing or looking through a transcript or whatever the use case is. There are, of course, lots of off-the-shelf tools, and I think those are worth playing with, and obviously, use what's available and what you can get your hands on and what's free and so forth. But I do think a lot of the big data projects end up requiring some degree of technical expertise or engineering systems.
Okay, thanks. Loreben, big topic, AI and obviously disinformation. But to start, can you please explain the work, the PolitiFact and the work that you're doing with them?
Sure. Thanks for having me. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, so PolitiFact is a fact-checking organization, and our reporters fact-check statements by politicians and pundits and candidates. And we also look into viral claims on social media. So I'm on the social media team mostly, and I fact-check claims that are on Meta platforms. We have partnerships with Meta and TikTok for fact-checking. So our day-to-day is like monitoring what claims or what narratives are popping up on these platforms and fact-checking them, so they may get labeled as misleading by fact-checkers, or yeah. And then yeah, that's what I do as a misinformation reporter.
At what point do you judge that a social media post has reached that viral threshold that it's worth fact checking, because there's so much disinformation out there?
Mm-hmm. So our Meta partnership, I'll talk about it more because that's the one that lets us that surfaces viral claims on Facebook, Threads, and Instagram. Facebook has its own algorithm for flagging when that threshold is met, that it's viral, and it also shows us the number of impressions that it gets. So that's all available to third-party fact checkers that are partners with Facebook, and that's the one that are that reach the most number of users, for example, or is spreading at a certain capacity that is urgent, as we say. Yeah.
What impact, I mean, how are you seeing this election cycle? How do you see the false information out there that's online, and what role is AI playing in this?
Mm-hmm. So for the past year, we're still seeing a lot of the same techniques that were being employed in past elections before the rise of generative AI. So a lot of the claims that we're seeing are still cheap fakes, or images or videos that are altered without the use of AI tools. So this may include like Photoshop, or even just clipping or splicing videos in a misleading way. We saw a lot of that even as ChatGPT and tools like Midjourney and Stable Diffusion were getting more popular. But we've also seen a lot more AI generated content that spread misleading narratives. So for example, like earlier in the year when there were more Republican candidates in the primary, we saw deepfakes of Ron DeSantis, and we also saw AI being employed in ads that these candidates were putting out. So yeah, AI has definitely played a role in this, in that it made false content or misleading content more easily, or people can easily make these kinds of content.
How difficult is it to detect AI generated images? I mean, I know there are tools online which claim to be able to detect if an image has been generated by AI, but I think the success rate has been a bit mixed, hasn't it?
Mm-hmm. So the tools for detection are definitely not advancing at the rate that tools for creation are evolving. So detection is definitely more challenging, especially since these AI tools are getting better at creating more realistic images. So what I do is I don't necessarily rely on detection tools. I don't take the results at face value. I try to corroborate these results with experts who have been analyzing AI generated content for longer than I've been doing. And they usually have these more advanced analysis tools. And yeah, we take all of those together to determine if something is authentic or not. It's especially more difficult for audio deepfakes. I wrote about audio deepfakes previously, and these are more difficult to detect. One, because there are less tools for detection available. And second, like an expert told me, they're more temporal in nature. So the visual cues won't are obviously will be absent in audio deepfakes. So you can't look whether there are missing hands or whether the mouth is wrong or is off. For audio deepfakes, like the Biden robocall that circulated a while back, once you pick up the phone, you won't necessarily flag immediately that something is off, and you can't necessarily go back and listen to the audio again to determine whether it's authentic or not. That sense of urgency for a phone call is also will also make listeners less aware or vigilant immediately that something might be AI generated.
I think there's a lot of concern. I mean, I know the kind of obvious AI fakery is images, but I think there's a lot of concern about audio. Can you talk a little bit more about the Biden New Hampshire example? I haven't. How convincing did you think it was? Did people just picking up their phones they would have thought it was authentic?
Mm-hmm. So there are a few things that were alarming about that. One is it was circulated, I think, 2 days before the primary. So if people didn't catch on to it, there might have been like a lag in debunking it. And then secondly, like I mentioned, there's a lack of cues. So if you're listening to it, you might think it's Biden, but if you listen more closely, you'll think it's like more monotone than he usually speaks, or that there are missing breathing sounds, for example, which are markers of audio deepfakes. And then the timing is really what I think is more more alarming about audio deepfakes, because we saw a similar case in Slovenia, or sorry, another country where such an audio deepfake was circulated also 2 days before the election, and fact checkers were scrambling to determine whether the audio was fake. And like I said, there weren't a lot of available tools for detecting whether an audio is fake. And in that country, there actually was like there was a ban on campaigning at a certain day before the election. So it's more difficult to debunk during that time period. And that's what a lot of experts are concerned about, like the timing of releasing such audio deepfakes, because it's harder. It'll take a longer time to debunk it. And if you release it on the day of an election, for example, state officials or states or locales, which may have less resources to debunk such deepfakes, might have difficulty telling voters that what they're listening to is fake, or what this, yeah.
I think you had something you wanted to say about tools detecting AI.
Well, just
sorry,
go ahead.
Go ahead.
Sorry, no, Loreben, you have him.
Was the question for me? Or
No, it was Zach. We had an exchange before, and you said you
no worries.
wanted to make a comment about the AI tools. Yeah.
Well, yeah, Loreben's the expert here, but I do think that, and totally fine, we have found the same thing, that like there's no surefire way to detect tools. But some tools coming out now, Get Real Labs, True Media, Pin Drop, or three. that come to mind are attempting to sort of productize this, especially for newsrooms. That I think one of them, True Media, is a nonprofit. It'll be available for free, and I think that those tools they're not going to give you a definitive assessment of the piece of media, but they can give you a lot of the clues to go on to attempt to make an assessment similar to calling up an expert, which is hard to replace. That's definitely the best way. I agree.
What do you think of these tools, Loreben?
I personally haven't tested a lot of them just because I found a lot of them to be unreliable. For the audio deepfake one, for example, the Biden robocall, I tested 4 tools and 3 of them didn't flag it as fake. And the reason why is because some audio might be compressed to the point that it's not easy to detect the features as AI generated. 11 Labs, for example, the tool that was used to make this Biden robocall has its own tool to detect whether something is a deepfake. And we ran the Biden robocall through this 11 Labs tool, and its own tool didn't recognize that it's a deepfake. And I asked an expert about this, and he said that it might have been a different audio recording, or it might have been compressed to the point that it's unrecognizable from what it was before. So personally, I don't really use like a lot of these tools in my reporting just because I found them to be unreliable. But that can change, and I hope that there are better tools forthcoming to help fact checkers and journalists.
I mean, one, and AFP, like PolitiFact, is one of Meta's third-party. It's part of Meta's third-party fact-checking program. I mean, one question that always comes up is how do you combat the scale of the disinformation? And I mean, I was watching Donny O'Sullivan and CNN yesterday, and he came up with this great example of Elon Musk, who has almost 185 million followers on X, posting a photograph of Kamala Harris dressed in what's supposed to look like a Communist Party uniform. And I looked at it yesterday. I think it had about 78 million views. I mean, I think there's 2 aspects to this I'd like to ask you about, Laura. I mean, first, I mean, do people actually believe this is true? And in a way, does it matter if it's true, if it just feeds into people's prejudices? Is that one danger which you confront with AI or any other kind of fake? And also, how can PolitiFact or any other fact checker compete with that kind of disinformation at such a scale? How can a fact check compete with something like that?
So that's definitely a challenge. I also saw that photo, and Trump himself also shared a photo of what looks to be Kamala Harris speaking to like an army with a hammer and sickle flag above. And these images, which are likely AI generated, only like reinforce those narratives that they're trying to spread. And yeah, it's a challenge because they have millions of followers, and PolitiFact only has so many. So once they tweet that or post that on their platforms, it's hard to take back that or even compete with the scale of which the impressions they get once they post it. But fact checking is still worthwhile if people are looking for information about a certain image, if they're wondering if it's true, because a lot of these people, when they think about AI or when they spot an image like this, they might be wondering if it's true or not. And if that information is available on Google or on our websites, on fact checkers' websites, I think it's still worthwhile. Although it's hard because a lot of the AI generated content that I've been seeing recently aren't straightforward or aren't necessarily fact checkable based on our methodology, based on what Meta considers fact checkable or rateable. And what I mean is, for example, if a post, I saw this video recently that's that takes the images of politicians and candidates and doing disturbing and harmful things. And it's in the caption that it's AI art, but it kind of reinforces those negative or misleading narratives. And it's not fact checkable because it's labeled AI, but it still reinforces those narratives. So in those cases, there's not much that fact checkers can do. We can probably like report on it, and other journalists can probably report on trends like those. But as long as information is available, I think that's worth doing.
There's an interesting thing has emerged in that you almost, I mean, one role of fact checkers now is to prove that something happened, because politicians are saying, you know, if they misspeak or whatever, they will say this was AI generated, right? And of course, Donald Trump saying that Kamala Harris, this big crowd, was actually not there, that it was an AI generated rally. Are you finding that cropping up a bit now? Are you having to do not so much prove that the image or the audio was AI generated, but you're having to prove it wasn't AI generated and show that it actually did happen? Is this a kind of new form of disinformation you're facing in the campaign?
Yes. Donald Trump has done this multiple. It's thunderstorming outside, so if you hear that, that's what it is. So Donald Trump has done this multiple times where he claims that a video of him or that this authentic image or video is AI generated when it's not. So in the past, I remember fact checking this this ad that showed a compilation of his gaffes, and he claimed that this was AI generated. So as a fact checker, I checked every one of those gaffes. It was, I think, 30 something clips of him making or misspeaking and stuff like those, and all of them were authentic. So it is a challenge for fact checkers in that takes time to debunk, but it is something worth debunking when he's making claims like this. And we also checked that claim of his that Kamala's rally was AI generated, or those images were AI generated, and we also found that that wasn't true, and it was corroborated by multiple authentic images.
Coming back to you, Zach, I asked ChatGPT just as an exercise for this discussion. I'm a journalist covering the US elections. Can you list 20 ways that artificial intelligence tools can be used to help me in my coverage? Which it promptly, happily did. Interestingly, Gemini wouldn't do it. It says it doesn't handle anything to do with politics.
Well, yeah, Google has gotten out of the politics game entirely, which is
so that was a bit of
might be good for their PR,
alley.
but there's a big limitation in the Gemini tool.
So the number one it popped up with was automated speech transcription and analysis. AI can transcribe and analyze speeches in real time, identifying key themes, shifts in tone and sentiment. This allows you to quickly highlight important points or trends in a candidate's message. What do you think? I mean,
I agree with that.
Speech to text is pretty critical, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it would definitely apply in the case I was talking about earlier of sort of a mining, going through just voluminous amounts of prior material of candidates' appearances, media, et cetera. You know, a lot of that, almost all of it's video and audio, and needs to be transcribed. You know, that technology has been around for a while, but LLMs, generative AI, has helped improve the technology. You know, if you're used to it, you know some of the awkwardness that can transpire between you talking to your phone and what the iPhone actually hears. That is getting better precisely because these models are now able to understand like the semantic meaning of not just of that word necessarily, but like in its context, and so, you know, guess what you were probably trying to say, things like that. So yeah, no, speech to text is I mean, we find in our newsroom is probably the number one use of AI. You know, just for reporters out in the field covering a press conference, why not turn it on? while you're taking notes to have a pretty good transcript. Of course, we're always going back and checking it against the audio if we're going to publish the quote, but it's a huge time saver for just getting a raw transcript down quickly. Yeah.
I mean, I was at meetings in Paris with AFP in June, and yeah, that for the reporters, the voice to text, the transcription is definitely kept coming up as the number one. You know, again, for smaller newsrooms, freelance journalists trying to just process all this information, what do you think of content summarization? How good are these tools at doing that? If you've got a whole slab of political speeches that you're trying to process, if you throw that information in, how can you come up with a decent summary? Do you think it's a good way of, it's a good labor saving approach?
Yeah, it can be. I mean, obviously it's going to depend on the context. There's a lot of context where, and a lot of reporters who insist on reading every single word because it's the only way they would feel comfortable. But look, an academic research paper explained in lay terms, because that's a subject I'm not familiar with, is a sort of perfect use for a summary. But also it may be less commonly thought of. A lot of really useful data meaning numerical data, come in the form of raw text. So one example, in New York City, the mayor's office last year regularly would update the press on how many migrants had come into the city over the prior month, but it did so verbally in the press conference and nowhere else. There was no official record kept. It was just the mayor would very frequently, give a new number. So he was creating a data set, whether they intended to or not. It was just necessary to apply, take all of those transcripts and ask an LLM to what I would call summarize the transcripts into a data set, into tabular data that's, in March, you said it was this amount, in April it was this number. LLMs are very good at that. And that's I guess I use that example to say, if you spend the time to give the kinds of instructions to the generative AI tool that are detailed enough to describe what you're looking for, you're likely to get pretty good results. If you just handed a PDF and say summarize this for me, you might get lucky, but you might also just get a humdrum paragraph that kind of distills it down into the most boring parts. And I'm sure you've read both versions at AI, and it is a lot of you get out of it the time and energy you put into constructing a prompt or instruction for the tool.
And what about polling data? How useful can AI be in processing that?
Yeah, I mean, data cleaning is a use case I think it can be quite good at. We've also found it useful in cases where we've got say a really long list of names or companies and just a little bit like a source's tip to go on, but not much more. And no way to examine all 100,000 names or companies individually. There we've sometimes used AI in the background to make a best guess, like who is this person? Where do they do? Not in any way because we would dare report that, with that very often could be incorrect. It's obviously not the type, the reporting process we would do to put information in front of our readers. But we've got 100,000 names and we need to get it down to 100 leads that we can then investigate by hand. And we found it to be quite useful at narrowing down the target to something that us mere humans can actually handle and do the bootleg reporting to get it to the finish line.
Right, funny questions from John J. Dill II. Are you using AI to research AI?
I'm still so new to the times. Well, the number one thing I've learned, it is such a big organization that the answer to that is probably yes. I'm just not aware. And I do think that, yeah, I mean, in general, I do think I know that, you know, investigation of algorithms is important at times, and there are some ways to do exactly what you're describing, but I'm not engaged in it personally. No.
Loreben, what advice would you give to, and again, I always think in terms of much smaller newsrooms and individual journalists, you know, who don't have the vast, you know, networks of fact checkers that other organizations have. What advice would you give to journalists who are covering the campaign and being bombarded by all speeches, the fakes, the social media posts? I mean, on their own, how would you recommend they try and approach in their reporting, fact checking, trying to debunk, you know, just just really the search for the truth? Are there good tools? I mean, obviously we can go to sites like PolitiFact to see the debunks, but if you're trying to do it a bit more in real time, what are the best tools for just your regular reporter trying to make sense of all of this?
So first, I would say just be vigilant and look and listen closely to whatever content you're monitoring for your beat. If you're following a certain candidate, for example, and looking at their ads, sometimes some of the deep fakes that fact checkers have found, or AI generated content that fact checkers have found, is just in one frame of a political ad, and someone flagged it as kind of off, and maybe it's AI generated, and they looked into that and turns out it was AI generated. So I would say that if you're starting with political content like that, just be vigilant and aware that something might not be, or don't take something at face value. Which is already what journalists do anyway, but maybe to an increased degree with the threat of artificial intelligence. Secondly, I would say to build sources. My sources who work on AI have really helped me in my reporting. And if you reach out to AI experts who can help you with visual analysis and who can lend their tools to you, it's important to build those relationships. And third, following what Zach said, I've found that some tools have been really helpful to fact checkers also, in terms of transcription and also analyzing big data sets. So even off the shelf tools like you mentioned, like I use Otter a lot in our live coverages for transcribing live events. And I also use Google Pinpoint, which has been helpful in fast lookup of big documents, or like documents with like hundreds of pages. So maybe look into what tools will help you the most in your coverage, and will help decrease the time it would take to fact check something or to report on something. I know fact checkers around the world have also developed ways that they could use AI tools like Gemini to kind of transcribe or parse through videos they're checking. Some of these videos that we fact checked have like run times of like hours. So if it would help you to get like timestamps of where this commentator is making a claim or what claims are being made in this video, then by all means, like maybe explore those AI tools.
Zach, another use of AI is in translation, right? And I think one point, of course, is that this whole conversation blew up with the arrival of generative AI, but of course we've been using AI for a long time in journalism. It's not a new phenomenon at all. It's just the Gen AI has been the new addition to the discussion. But what do you think of using the automatic translation, which has become reasonably sophisticated? Do you use it in the New York Times newsroom, and what do you think about it?
We do. We have recently started producing the first draft of our translations from English into Spanish by a machine. I'm not always doing the first draft that way, but most of the time. And then from there, going through usually 2 rounds of edits of the machine translation before publication. The net result of which has been we're publishing a lot more articles in Spanish, a lot more of the Times is translated into Spanish every day than was the case before, simply because the process got a lot more efficient. We're still putting in that effort to do 2 whole rounds of edits after the machine translation, which I think some people might argue is overkill, because you're right, it is very, the machine translations at this point have gotten very good, but they're not great, and they're not perfect, and they're certainly not good enough to go out without review, and there's certain nuances, obviously, the language that we still are only able to achieve by hand, but it's been really cool to see the tech advance as fast as it has, because of course that has us thinking, what other languages that we publish in many other languages, but not nearly as much as we do in Spanish. And so are there other markets we could serve in the same way? I mean, TBD, no decisions I think have been made.
But you always have human oversight before you publish a translation.
Yeah, we released principles for the use of generative AI in the Times newsroom earlier this year, and one of the 3 principles was with human oversight and review. We are always responsible for what we publish. It doesn't matter how it was created or what technology might have been used in the process. That's on us, and so as a result, of course, we're going to review it before hitting publish. And at this point, I mean, I got to be honest too, like the tech is nowhere near perfect enough to even even have a conversation about auto publishing. Maybe elsewhere, but we're not even thinking about it. It might get good enough that we have to think about it, but I still think we're going to land where we do today, which is there's always a human in the loop.
I mean, that last year with the team, I drew up the AFP guidelines on using AI, and independently, everybody basically came up with the same concept, which great.
Well, if you ask humans to write the rules, they're going to say humans first, right?
You need human oversight, yeah.
And I mean, I believe we should, but maybe you should ask ChatGPT what it thinks the rules should be.
I mean, one thing I find with translations, and obviously with AFP, I speak French as well as English, is that I think like a lot of things in AI, at first glance, it looks pretty good. And when you start to dig into it, you find it's not as good as it would have been. But you're also locked into the translation it gives you. So you're trying to slightly tweak it, where it's not necessarily the way you would have translated the text.
I mean, we've had to apply our own additional code and essentially our own custom dictionary over, as I'm sure IFP does, and Reuters does with its translations. I mean, it's not up quite ready for prime time.
And another thing I would never do is publish a translation into a language I don't read myself.
Sure.
I wouldn't feed in a speech in German, get an automatic translation, put that in, and even quote it in a story. I mean, if I don't speak the language, I would still need somebody with the knowledge of the language to check it.
Yeah.
Welcome back, Dan. Have you got some questions for our panelists?
There are a couple quick questions before we cut to our audience here. Hey, Zach, Loreben, state governments are increasingly proposing laws to regulate AI. To what extent do you think AI needs to be regulated, and if so, how?
Do you want to go first, Loreben?
Yeah, sure, go right ahead.
Okay. I will say that I found that, or in my view, I think labels would really help people determine whether something is AI generated or not. I think that's a good first step for any platform or any government, is to just help people at first glance know whether this is AI generated or not, whether that's mandating it through or in political ads, or whether if it's mandating platforms to put labels on content that's generated through their AI tools. So that's my view.
I agree, and would plug one emerging standard, C2PA. So the letter C, the number 2, letters PA, is emerging, is maybe going to become a standard. A number of the big tech platforms, Meta, but also Google, have said they're adopting it. So meaning they're going to attach metadata that can't be changed by someone else, or if it is changed, it'll be visible as such. That says, when they generate an AI image for a user, that says it was AI generated. I mean, they may also apply a little watermark on the side that you can literally see it, but also so that computers could read it. And you could do it you can use C2PA the other way, to just to show the provenance of a legitimate piece of media. And we're not doing this quite yet, but we're studying it very carefully, because this standard has the capability to go all the way back to the camera. So some new cameras shipping today will apply that metadata at the point that the shutter clicks. And look, I mean, I'm under no illusions that this will solve misinformation, but it's cool, and I'd love to have it to, the next time we've got an amazing photograph that's totally legitimate but being questioned out in the world, and we could we could go to the tape, so to speak, and show the metadata. So I think that's quite interesting. And then on the, in terms of that said, I don't know that I would suggest any governments impose the metadata. Overall, when it comes to regulation, I'm personally a little wary of state by state regulations, because we're likely to get into a situation that's a little hard for both consumers and companies alike to abide by. The Biden administration put out pretty forceful regulations earlier this year, which are, basically require federal regulation of LLMs of a certain size. All the major foundational models need to go through some vetting by the federal government now. The Republican platform this year, among many other things, calls to retract that executive order and sort of replace it with one focused more on using AI for military and defense purposes, and lessening regulations on private companies. So that's one. I doubt there are that many voters, maybe a few in Silicon Valley, who are single issue voters focused on AI regulation in 2024. But for those who are, there's a pretty stark choice between the two candidates.
Two more quick questions. Do you think that we're going to reach a point of no return with AI, wherein the detection software just can't pick it up? And when do you think that might happen?
Loreben?
So it's hard to say. At the moment, we're still it's still fairly doable to determine whether something is authentic or not. But it is rapidly advancing in a way that makes it difficult sometimes for tools. It is difficult right now for tools to keep up, and experts also have to keep developing ways to monitor or detect if something is AI generated. But I'm not sure whether I'm hopeful that we will be able to keep up with it, and I'm not sure about a point of no return, as you say.
So we have questions from. Sorry, Zach.
Yeah. I was just going to chime in on that question. I would argue, in a certain sense, we may have reached the point of no return. Not technologically, because Loreben's totally right. That's still, I think, very possible in most cases to make that distinction, but socially. And I was thinking earlier, as Loreben was talking, the main effect of misinformation is not to fool people, but just to create ambiguity and this sort of fuzziness or gray area that I don't know what's true or not, so I can just pick my own facts or ignore inconvenient ones. And that's quite difficult force to push up against. But at the end of the day, right, this is all a question of trust. I was talking about potential like technological solutions to trust, like metadata earlier, but trust is really a human thing. And again, I'm under no illusions this will be a solution to misinformation, but a lot of news organizations, including the Times, have put a real focus in the last few years, I think smartly, on like trust as an actual value, thing maybe we can even measure, but certainly want to sort of grow with our readers, not just say, and doing specific tactics like putting our reporters faces in front of readers in the bylines. You've probably seen we've done a lot more videos both on our own site and on platform with a feature our reporters, giving people behind the scenes and what went into the report. A lot of these initiatives are all related to the idea that at the end of the day, I don't think it's going to be government regulation, metadata, or politics. That it's going to be like I decide I trust Agence France-Presse. It's history of high ethical standards. Or PolitiFact is the best place to go to know if something is true or not. And I mean, of course, a lot of people, most people, are not going to think that way, but for the huge audiences we all serve, I think that it is kind of a one-to-one human trust relationship that matters more than anything.
That's a good segue to some more of our questions.
Yeah, we'll have questions. Dan, you want to? We have about 10 or so minutes, so we get some questions from the audience. So Dan, do you want to?
Absolutely. We've got a question here about, do you see a use for provenance logs, Zach? Basically specializing in cryptographic metadata for experts. In other words, is this something you think people would realistically use?
I mean, not the average consumer, but that is precisely how the C2PA standard works. So the reference to cryptography in that question is what I was referring to earlier in like this metadata, like, information that comes along with an image file or video. Today it would say, when it was taken, maybe where, if the camera applied that information. This additional metadata would be applied cryptographically, which ensures that it can't be modified, or if it is modified later on, it would be obvious, at least to a technical expert examining the photo. So yeah, I mean, look, like I just said, I don't think technical solutions are the end all answer, but I do have some hope that those standards, or I believe in those standards. I think we should all be using them to help distinguish synthetic media from real authentic media.
Speaking of distinguishing, we have a question from a former SPJ president, Kevin Smith. For the both of you, how are you keeping the public informed about your use of AI in stories? What disclosures are being offered?
I can speak for PolitiFact and Pointer. Pointer has an AI policy with regard to disclosing whether we use AI tools in our reporting. And I think we've also encouraged like newsrooms to draft their own AI policy. But yeah, for our newsroom, we do disclose in our stories if we ever use an AI tool to generate text or images or whatnot. Yeah.
And that reminds me, I saw Pointer a few months ago put out what I thought was a really good, almost like template for other help newsrooms in crafting their own AI policy. What was good about it was not so much like the Mad Lib style, that was helpful, but like it really was thorough in pointing out all the different issues you might want to think about and consider in crafting the policy. So if you are out there trying to craft your own policy, I'd definitely say look at that, and also look to some of the newsrooms that have already released theirs publicly. I mentioned the Times we did, or we did our principles several months ago, and those are out there publicly if you want to look at them. We also have more specific guidelines, legal trainings, standard for any of our reporters who are making specific use of Gen AI in their reporting. And then in terms of disclosures to the public, I mean, our principles say commit to disclosure. The type of disclosure is what is really dependent on the context. Most of our uses of AI in the newsroom are for reporting, and we tend to put that as in the methodology section of the piece. We're not generating any new content, right? Nothing's like in the Gen AI sense that most people think of. So there's nothing to disclose there. But if we we were for some reason, then of course I think we would.
And it's a good question. I mean, transparency is the rule, for sure. Dan?
It figures we've got a journalism student asking this question. Do you think AI will be a threat to journalism jobs?
So it all comes back to trust, as Zach was mentioning earlier. And as long as journalists keep explaining what they do and like growing trust initiatives like that, PolitiFact has also been thinking of ways to establish trust with their readers, and that's highlighting our methodology in the process. And I think that's what highlights our work as credible and trustworthy, as opposed to the pink slime websites that AI is making like easier to create. So these news websites that are just churning out content that are AI generated will be considerably of less quality than what journalists are putting out. So I don't think that will be an issue.
We've got multiple questions that are along the same lines, returning back to that question about folks who don't have the resources of a PolitiFact or the New York Times. What AI tools can they use at a low cost, whether it's student journalists or freelancers or those working in smaller newsrooms? We've got at least 3 questions along that theme.
And also, let's keep it on the campaign.
Yes,
question from Sharon Obsats: has there been any discussion about news organizations or PolitiFact helping student newsrooms with election AI fact checking? If the student newsrooms cannot afford a paid tool, I heard the panelists mention a free tool. So yeah, Loreben on that one, maybe.
Yeah.
Okay. I just want to say that Pointer also has MediaWise, which does partner with teen fact checkers and a younger audience to put out fact checks and to serve fact checks to younger audiences. And MediaWise also puts out a lot of great content on media literacy that classrooms and teachers can use. In terms of tools, there are some free tools that fact checkers like we do. I mentioned earlier, Otter for transcription is a great tool that we use to cover live events and transcribe things as things happen. We also have Google Pinpoint, which I think is available for journalists. I'm not sure about student journalists, but I think you can contact Google and get access to it if you want to. Pinpoint helps us collect like large documents, like I said, and kind of filter through them. I think that's also free for journalists. Zach may have more examples.
Those are great, and I guess I said I wasn't here to give a plug for a particular model, but if you had to pick one, right now I'd say it's worth a subscription to Claude Pro, which is Anthropic's. Anthropic is one of the major LLM developers. Their version of ChatGPT or Gemini is called Claude. The latest model is excellent. It's particularly good at understanding and doing some writing tests. And they've added a few features that I think make it a lot more usable as a tool. So it's not a free tool. You want to say it's $20 a month. If you're interested at all in this stuff, I think that's a worthwhile investment, and certainly cheaper than standing up a whole AI initiatives team to play around with stuff which may or may not, of course, produce anything of worth. That's going to take a while for this stuff to shake out, and you can get pretty far, I think, with some of these tools. Just to at least get a sense of what's possible.
I think we're coming up to the hour, Dan, so maybe we'll have time for one last question from the audience.
Maybe 1 or 2 more. I got a good one I want to end on, but before we get to that, we've got a person asking, with the proliferation of social media and artificial intelligence online and in social media, is it making people's decisions harder or easier in elections?
I think time will tell whether AI has any real impact on how voters decide. But on the day-to-day, what we're seeing is they're finding it more difficult to gauge whether something is authentic or not. So if you see the comments on these deepfake videos or the deepfake images, you'll still see people believing that these are true or authentic or are saying true things. And that's where journalists and fact checkers come in to kind of supplement that with information that says otherwise. So in the day-to-day, if you believe that Target is selling satanic clothing to children, maybe that'll affect like the local consumer, even if those are AI generated images. So stuff like that will affect day-to-day decisions. But in the long term, I think it remains to be seen.
I think this is a great question to end on from our audience. Can you give us, to both of you, your best case future scenario for AI in journalism and your worst case future scenario for AI in journalism?
The best case looks something like we're able to put a journalist on every street corner in America and equivalent in every other country because, and not literally, but because through a mixture of human on the ground reporting and some of these big data techniques I was talking about earlier, we are able to, have eyes and ears in more places that matter and observe changes and trends that are simply going unnoticed entirely today. And therefore serve our communities well and better than we do today. The worst case scenario looks something like a number of existing or new media companies go the route Geo Media and some others have taken in producing articles entirely with generative AI tools. And while these have errors in them, are not the best written stuff, they're like close enough to accurate and pretty readable and most of all free that people don't care to pay for the better stuff. This sort of overtakes and dominates the web, and there's no market whatsoever for high quality journalism. I don't see that transpiring precisely because that dynamic will help buttress the market for high quality journalism, as Loreben was saying earlier. But something like that is already happening anyway. And, I think we'll probably see some combination of those two scenarios, the good and the bad.
Loreben, your thoughts? Best and
I
worst
had
case?
I had a lot of the same thoughts as what Zach said. I think worst case for me, or sorry, I saw the best case. Is just empowering journalists and enabling journalists to do the kinds of investigations they want to do with the help of AI. And then worst case is that AI develops to the point that we truly cannot tell what is real anymore, and it just drives a wedge through society, and we don't believe what's on our feeds anymore. Our feeds become unreadable, and we stop trusting in each other and in institutions like the media, which is like a very broad scenario.
No, I was going to say it sounds like today, sadly.
Yeah.
The name of this talk
But there's still hope.
Yeah.
The name of the talk was Promise and Perils in AI and election coverage. So final question to wrap up: more promise than perils, more positives than negatives in AI coverage for journalists in the election, or do you think there's more upside to AI in the election coverage or more downsides? What's your feeling? Zach?
I think what we've identified is that the upsides and downsides are so different. Like upsides are on a totally different track than the downside. I don't see a way to net that out. I mean, it'll keep it's creating jobs like mine. So
must be Loreben?
It's kind of it's hard to answer that, but I hope that journalists like don't like close the door to it completely, and like keep exploring, so that they may find like whatever works for them in their newsrooms, however small they may be or however large. And yeah, to just use these tools in a responsible way that furthers their mission.
And
Great
with
stuff.
that, sorry, Dan, were you going to say something?
Oh yeah, thank you so much. If y'all aren't following their work, Loreben's doing some great reporting, and Zach is really at the leading edge, speaking in events, and we're just so honored to have the two of you here. We're thrilled. And Eric has a great new book. I have just put it in the chat one more time: Journalism Ethics, 21 Essentials from Wars to AI. And thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, everybody, and
Thanks
thanks
Thanks for
everybody in
having
the
us.
audience for joining. Thank you. Bye-bye.